I hate him. That is what people said about Lex Luger everywhere he went. The man looked absolutely perfect. He had enormous muscles on top of muscles. He stood 6 foot 4 inches tall, like a superhero carved from stone. His hair was perfect. His smile was perfect. His body looked like it belonged on a magazine cover. When he walked into a room, heads turned. When he stepped into the ring, cameras flashed. He was called the total package for a reason. Everything about his appearance screamed superstar, but behind that perfect look was a man nobody wanted around. The locker room turned their backs when he walked past. The veterans whispered in corners. The new guys learned quickly to avoid him. Lex Luger became the most hated man in wrestling, and the darkest part of his story proves exactly why. May 1st, 2003. Oh, Miss Elizabeth died in a townhouse in Georgia. She was only 42 years old. The coroner said it was an accident. Painkillers mixed with alcohol stopped her heart. Her body was found in the home she shared with Lex Luger, but just weeks before, in April 2003, police had been called to that same house. Neighbors heard shouting. They heard things breaking. When police arrived, Elizabeth had visible bruises on her body. The marks were clear. The situation was obvious. Lex Luger was arrested and charged with battery. The news spread through the wrestling world like wildfire, and then, just weeks later, she was dead. When the news broke, the wrestling world did not mourn quietly. They blamed him. They said he dragged her down. They said he destroyed her. The woman who had been the first lady of wrestling was gone. Washington Lex Luger stood alone in the center of the blame. The accusations came from every direction. Fans, wrestlers, friends, everyone saw the same thing. A man who had destroyed the life of someone they loved. Before we go further, take a second and use the hype feature to give this video some love. It really helps us bring you more deep dive stories like this one. We appreciate every bit of support. How did it come to this? How did a man built like a Greek god end up so completely alone? The answer is not simple. It is not one mistake or one bad decision. It is a pattern that started the moment Lex Luger walked into his first wrestling ring. He came from professional football. He played in the Canadian Football League. He played in the United States Football League. He had the body that comes from years of weights and training. He had the look that promoters dream about, but he did not pay his dues. In wrestling, that matters more than almost anything else. You cannot skip the line. You cannot walk in and take the top spot without earning it. But Lex did exactly that. The promoters saw his muscles and his $1 million smile, and they pushed him straight to the top of the card. They put him in main events. They put him in championship matches. They gave him everything. The veterans looked at this and saw a pretty boy who had not earned a single thing. That is where the hate began. That is where the foundation was laid. In wrestling, there is a word for real animosity. They call it heat, but there are different kinds of heat. There is the heat you see on television, the fake arguments, the scripted rivalries, the choreographed confrontations designed to sell tickets. That is work. That is the show. Then there is real heat, the kind that makes men refuse to work with you, the kind that makes them sabotage your matches in front of thousands of people, the kind that makes them wish you would pack your bags and never come back. Real heat is dangerous. It can ruin careers. It can end friendships. It can even turn violent. I said Lex was an outsider from day one. He never stopped being an outsider. Even when he was on top of the world, holding championships and headlining the biggest shows, the boys in the back saw him as a corporate creation, a manufactured star, a fake, a guy who did not truly belong in their world. Let's count down the 10 wrestlers and entities that hated Lex Luger the most throughout his controversial career. These are not scripted storylines created for television. These are not fake angles designed to sell tickets to live events. These are real, genuine grudges born from real conflicts, real fights, and real consequences that lasted for years. Starting from number 10 and counting down to the most infamous. Number 10, Eric Bischoff. Eric Bischoff ran World Championship Wrestling during its hottest and most successful years. Sure, he was the mastermind behind some of the biggest moments in wrestling history. He was the man who brought Hulk Hogan to WCW and changed the entire industry overnight. He was the man who created and launched Monday Nitro, going head-to-head with the World Wrestling Federation on Monday nights. He was the man who nearly put Vince McMahon out of business. For 83 consecutive weeks, WCW Nitro beat WWF Raw in the television ratings. Eric Bischoff was on top of the world, but Eric Bischoff also had a very complicated and fractured relationship with Lex Luger. At first, Eric did not even want Lex back in WCW. They had fought over contracts before. Lex had left WCW in the past when it suited his own interests. He had walked away from pushes. He had walked away from opportunities. Eric knew Lex was not loyal to anyone but himself. He knew Lex Lex would take the best deal and run without looking back. But Sting, one of the biggest stars in WCW, pushed for it. Sting wanted his friend back in the company, so Eric agreed to bring Lex back, even though he had serious reservations about it. Lex showed up unannounced on the very first episode of Monday Nitro in September 1995. Nobody in the wrestling world knew it was coming. It was kept completely secret. When Lex walked out on that first Nitro, the crowd exploded. It was a huge surprise and a massive statement. But the heat between Eric and Lex never really went away. It simmered under the surface for years. Eric saw Lex as a shiny new toy who lost his shine fast. When Lex first came back, Eric gave him a big push. But when WCW started to fall apart in the late 1990s, Eric moved on to other stars. He focused on Goldberg. He focused on the NWO. Lex felt dropped. He felt abandoned. He felt like Eric had used him and thrown him away. The trust between them was never there. Eric later described Lex's final years in wrestling as falling into a black hole of addiction. He watched Lex spiral downward. He watched Lex become unreliable and unpredictable. And when Miss Elizabeth died in May 2003, Eric was one of the many people in the industry who quietly blamed Lex for what happened to her. The business relationship between Eric Bischoff and Lex Luger was always fragile. It was built on convenience, not genuine respect. And when WCW finally died in 2001, so did any real connection between Eric Bischoff and Lex Luger. Number 9, Randy Savage and Miss Elizabeth. Why Randy Savage was one of the most intense and driven performers in the entire history of professional wrestling. He was paranoid about everything. He was possessive to an extreme degree, and he was completely obsessed with Miss Elizabeth. She was not just his wife. She was not just his manager. She was everything to him. When they were married and working together in the World Wrestling Federation, Randy would lock Elizabeth in the dressing room so other wrestlers could not even talk to her. He did not trust anyone around her. He barely let her out of his sight. Even after they divorced in 1992, Randy still saw her as his in his mind. The wrestling world saw her as his too. That perception never changed. When Lex Luger started dating Elizabeth in the mid to late 1990s, it created an unspoken tension that hung over the entire industry. When Randy never confronted Lex directly about the relationship, he never walked up to him backstage and said anything. But Randy watched from a distance. He saw Elizabeth's life start to fall apart piece by piece. He saw the addiction take over her life. He saw her spiral downward, and he felt completely helpless to stop it. Lex and Elizabeth lived together in Georgia. They shared a townhouse in a quiet neighborhood. But inside that townhouse, things were far from quiet. They shared drugs. They shared alcohol. They shared a lifestyle that was slowly destroying both of them. The relationship was toxic from the beginning. In April 2003, the police were called to their home. Neighbors had heard screaming and shouting. When the police arrived and went inside, Elizabeth had visible bruises on her arms and body. The marks were obvious. And the situation was clear. Lex was arrested on the spot and charged with battery. The mugshot made the news. The wrestling world was shocked but not entirely surprised. Then just a few short weeks later, Elizabeth died. The official cause of death was listed as an accidental overdose. A mixture of painkillers and alcohol stopped her heart. But everyone who knew her understood the truth. She had been on a downward spiral for years. She had been struggling with addiction, and Lex had been right there with her the entire time, doing nothing to help her and everything to enable her. After her death, the police searched the townhouse from top to bottom. They found drugs everywhere. Pills, powders, paraphernalia, everything you could imagine. Lex was immediately charged with 13 separate counts of drug possession. The evidence was overwhelming. When the wrestling world completely turned on Lex after that, they said he dragged Liz down into the darkness with him. They said he killed her. They said he destroyed the woman who had meant so much to so many people. Randy Savage never spoke publicly about Elizabeth's death. He kept his grief private, but those who were close to him said he was absolutely devastated. He had loved Elizabeth for most of his adult life. They had been married. They had been partners. They had built something beautiful together, and now she was gone forever. The shadow of Miss Elizabeth hangs over Lex Luger's entire legacy more than anything else he ever did in wrestling. It is the darkest chapter of his life, the one that cannot be erased or explained away, the one that defines how many people will always see him. Number 8, Ric Flair and the Four Horsemen. Ric Flair was both Lex Luger's greatest in-ring mentor and one of his biggest sources of professional friction and resentment. Flair carried Lex through the most critically acclaimed matches of his entire career. Flair provided the in-ring psychology. Flair provided the work rate. Flair provided everything that Lex simply lacked as a performer. When you watch those old matches between Ric Flair and Lex Luger, you are watching a master craftsman doing all the heavy lifting to make his opponent look like a star. Flair taught Lex how to work properly. He showed him how to tell a story inside the ring. He showed him when to speed up and when to slow down. He showed him how to make the audience care about what was happening. But despite all of that teaching and all of that generosity in the ring, Flair also resented Lex deeply. On the Four Horsemen, Flair Flair's legendary stable and brotherhood included veterans like Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard. These were men who had paid their dues the hard way. They had worked the territories for years and years. They had driven thousands of miles in beat-up cars. They had wrestled in high school gyms and county fairs. They had earned every single dollar they made and every bit of respect they received. Then Lex Luger showed up with his football muscles and his pretty boy smile, and the promoters just handed him everything on a silver platter. The Horsemen accepted Lex into the group eventually, but only because management wanted it and practically demanded it. They never truly respected him as an equal. They saw him as a quitter from day one. They saw him as a guy who would jump ship and leave for a better deal the very second it was offered to him. And as it turned out, they were absolutely right about that. In 1991, a major scandal rocked the wrestling world. Ric Flair left WCW and went to the World Wrestling Federation. The shocking part was that he left while still in possession of the NWA World Heavyweight Championship belt. He literally took the physical championship with him. It was a huge embarrassment for WCW. They needed someone to fill the massive void that Flair left behind. They chose Lex Luger to be that man. But Lex did not stay in that position for long at all. Just like the Horsemen had predicted and feared, Lex left WCW shortly after getting the big push. He went to the World Bodybuilding Federation first, then to the World Wrestling Federation. The Four Horsemen saw it as the ultimate betrayal and proof of everything they had always believed about him. Lex had been given the top spot in the company. He had been trusted with the main event, and he walked away from all of it without a second thought. Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard never forgave him for that. Not ever. They saw WCW as their home. It was where they belonged. It was their family. Lex saw it as just another workplace, just another job, just another stepping stone. That fundamental difference in how they viewed the business created permanent heat between them. Even years later, when Lex eventually returned to WCW yet again, the Horsemen never fully trusted him. Ric Flair continued to work with him because he was professional and because he had to. But the respect was completely gone. Flair had carried Lex to great matches and great moments. But Lex had proven himself to be exactly what the veterans always thought he was. A corporate creation with no loyalty to anyone or anything except himself. Number 7, Hulk Hogan. Hulk Hogan was the biggest star in the entire history of professional wrestling. Nobody was bigger. Nobody was more famous. Nobody had more power. He was the man who made wrestling mainstream in America. He was the man who sold out stadiums all over the world. He was the ultimate gatekeeper of the industry, and he saw Lex Luger as a direct threat to everything he had built. In the late 1980s, when Lex was first starting to make waves, promoters and wrestling journalists constantly compared him to Hogan. They said Lex could be the next Hulk Hogan. They said Lex had the body for it. They said Lex had the look for it. They said Lex had the charisma for it. Hogan absolutely did not like hearing any of that. Hogan had spent his entire career making sure that nobody ever took his spot at the top. He was a master politician backstage. He knew how to protect his position. He knew how to keep other guys down when he needed to. When Lex Luger showed up completely unannounced on the very first episode of Monday Nitro in September 1995, it created immediate tension with Hulk Hogan. Hogan was the established centerpiece of WCW at that time. He was the reason WCW had become hot again. He was the reason fans were tuning in. His arrival from the WWF had changed everything for the company. And now here was Lex Luger making a surprise return and threatening to steal some of that spotlight. In 1997, Hulk Hogan even dropped the WCW World Heavyweight Championship to Lex Luger on Monday Nitro. It was supposed to be a huge moment for Lex. It was supposed to be his crowning achievement. But the underlying friction and jealousy between them never went away. Not really. Hogan always saw Lex as a guy trying to take his spot. Lex saw Hogan as a selfish politician who only cared about protecting himself. They patched things up enough to work together and make money together. But the genuine respect was never there. It was all business. It was all politics. Hogan's jealousy and Lex's resentment created a power struggle that defined their entire relationship for years. In the end, like always, Hogan won the power struggle. Hogan always won. He always found a way to come out on top. And Lex was left on the outside once again, looking in at what could have been. Number 6, the Clique. When Lex Luger joined the World Wrestling Federation in 1993, he walked straight into a locker room that was completely controlled by the Clique. This was a powerful group of 5 wrestlers who had massive influence and power backstage. Shawn Michaels, Scott Hall, Kevin Nash, Triple H, Sean Waltman. They used their personal relationships and their influence with Vince McMahon to protect their own spots on the card. They also used that same power to systematically destroy anyone they did not like or respect. And they absolutely did not like Lex Luger one bit. Lex was repackaged as the narcissist when he first arrived. He would pose in front of mirrors. He wore shiny metallic trunks. He was the embodiment of vanity and self-obsession. Then the WWF completely changed direction and turned him into an all-American hero. They put him on a custom tour bus called the Lex Express and sent him traveling around the entire country meeting fans. The goal was clear and obvious. They wanted to make Lex Luger into the next Hulk Hogan. The Kliq saw right through the whole thing immediately. They saw yet another corporate push star who had not earned his spot through years of hard work. They saw a guy getting handed opportunities that other people had to fight for. Shawn Michaels absolutely hated working with Lex in the ring. During their matches together, Shawn would deliberately take silly, exaggerated bumps that made Lex's offense look weak and uncoordinated. He would sell in a mocking way. He would make Lex look pedestrian and limited. It was subtle enough that most fans did not notice. The Kliq absolutely loved every second of it. They had successfully sabotaged the entire push. Lex's momentum was completely killed in that moment. The image of him celebrating a meaningless, hollow victory became a lasting symbol of his failure in the WWF. The Kliq won the political war. Lex lost everything, and his time in the World Wrestling Federation was over not long after that embarrassing moment. Number 5. Sting. Sting was supposed to be Lex Luger's very best friend in the entire wrestling business. They were an incredibly successful tag team that fans loved. They were business partners who co-owned a high-end gym in Atlanta called Main Event Fitness. They seemed inseparable, but even this close friendship was plagued by significant real heat and tension. And the problem started when Sting underwent a genuine conversion to Christianity. His entire worldview changed. He became far less tolerant of the typical road life that wrestlers lived. He did not like the constant drug use anymore. He did not like the heavy drinking anymore. He did not like the cheating and the affairs anymore. And Lex Luger was actively doing all of those things without any shame or hesitation. The breaking point in their friendship came when Sting allegedly ratted Lex out directly to his wife. According to multiple sources in shoot interviews, Sting told Lex's wife about his extramarital affairs on the road. To Sting, who had found religion and morality, it was simply the right thing to do. It was what his conscience demanded. To the boys in the locker room, it was an unforgivable betrayal of trust. You absolutely do not break the man code under any circumstances. You do not tell another guy's wife what happens when the boys are out on the road. It is an unwritten rule that everyone understands. The fallout from this betrayal was immediate and severe. Lex and Sting completely stopped speaking to each other. Their profitable gym partnership dissolved and fell apart, but World Championship Wrestling kept pairing them together on television as a team. They were forced to pretend to be close friends on camera while genuinely hating each other in real life backstage. It created an incredibly awkward and uncomfortable situation. Some wrestlers in the locker room actually respected Sting for standing up for what he believed in morally. They saw him as a man of principle who refused to compromise his values. Others saw him as a snitch and a rat who broke the sacred bonds of brotherhood. The heat between Lex and Sting created a very complicated, intense dynamic in the WCW locker room that affected everyone. Eventually, after a long period of coldness, they managed to patch things up just enough to work together professionally. But the genuine friendship they once had was never, ever the same again. The deep trust between them was completely broken and shattered. Sting had made a choice to prioritize his morality over his loyalty to his friend. Lex saw it as the ultimate personal betrayal, and their once strong relationship became just another casualty of Lex's outsider status and his destructive lifestyle choices. Number 4, Eric Watts. Eric Watts was the son of the authoritarian Bill Watts. Much where he was a young wrestler trying to prove himself and make it in WCW during a very difficult time, and he genuinely hated Lex Luger with an intense, burning passion. Eric looked at Lex and saw everything that was wrong with the business. But the story of Eric Watts and Lex Luger does not end with that hatred. It takes a dramatic and emotional turn years later. Lex suffered a devastating spinal stroke that left him completely paralyzed from the neck down. His body, the very thing that had defined his entire identity and career, was suddenly broken and useless. The total package could not even move. Eric Watts heard about what had happened to Lex, and despite all of his years of intense hatred, despite all of the anger he had carried for so long, he made the decision to visit Lex in the hospital. Eric cried on the long drive to the hospital. He did not fully understand why he was crying. He still hated Lex. The hatred that had consumed him for years was completely gone. In its place was deep human empathy and understanding. This transformation was a rare and powerful moment of true redemption in a career that had been defined almost entirely by conflict and animosity. Eric Watts proved that time, tragedy, and genuine humility can heal even the very deepest wounds between people. Number 3, Bill Watts. In 1992, Bill Watts was appointed as the Executive Vice President of World Championship Wrestling. He brought with him a management style that was strict, authoritarian, old school, and absolutely brutal. Bill Watts ran WCW exactly like he had run his own Mid-South wrestling territory back in the 1980s. He demanded complete discipline from everyone. He demanded physical toughness at all times. He demanded total respect for authority, and he had absolutely no patience whatsoever for pampered stars like Lex Luger, who he saw as soft and entitled. Watts introduced a series of harsh rules and mandates that made life absolutely miserable for the wrestlers. He personally removed all of the protective mats from ringside at shows. He wanted the product to look tougher and more legitimate. He instituted a strict ban on heels and baby faces being seen together in public places. He wanted to protect kayfabe, the illusion that wrestling was real. He also aggressively pushed for massive salary cuts across the entire roster. Lex Luger was one of the very highest paid stars in the entire company at that time. Bill Watts wanted to dramatically cut his pay. Lex absolutely refused to accept any cuts. The friction between them quickly became completely unbearable for both men. Watts looked at Lex and saw a pampered, pretty boy star who had not earned his position through years of struggling. Lex looked at Watts and saw a tyrannical dinosaur who did not understand the modern wrestling business at all. The rules that Watts brutally enforced were absolutely harsh. If you lost a real fight outside the arena, you were immediately fired. No questions asked. The constant pressure was suffocating. The environment became incredibly toxic. Lex eventually used all of the friction and conflict with Watts to negotiate his complete exit from WCW. He left for the World Bodybuilding Federation first, then moved to the World Wrestling Federation. Watts and all of his supporters saw Lex's departure as yet another betrayal. Lex was right in the middle of a massive main event push at the time. He was being carefully built as the future face of the entire company, and he just walked away from all of it without any loyalty. Bill Watts never forgave Lex for that decision, not ever. The heat between Bill Watts and Lex Luger was fundamentally a clash of completely different philosophies. It was old school traditional values versus new school corporate thinking. It was toughness and grit versus vanity and image. It was discipline versus ego. And in the end, Lex chose to leave the company entirely rather than submit to Watts's iron rule. Number 2, Scott Steiner. Scott Steiner called himself a genetic freak, and he had the body to back up that claim. He was also an exceptionally accomplished amateur wrestler with real credentials. He was a Division I All-American at the University of Michigan. He had competed at the highest levels of legitimate amateur wrestling. He took the craft of professional wrestling incredibly seriously, and he absolutely hated guys like Lex Luger, who, in his view, did not respect the craft at all and were just there to collect paychecks. As WCW began falling apart and collapsing in the late 1990s, Scott Steiner transformed himself into his Big Papa Pump persona. He became one of the most vocal, dangerous, and unpredictable performers in the entire company, and he aimed his considerable venom directly at Lex Luger with brutal precision. The tension between them finally exploded on live television for millions of people to see. During the chaotic final years of WCW, when the company was dying, Steiner used his precious airtime on Monday Nitro to deliver a scathing, completely unscripted verbal assault on Lex. He looked directly into the camera and said with pure venom, "Lex Luger, you are a piece of shit, and everybody in the back knows it." This was not a carefully scripted storyline angle designed to sell pay-per-view buys. This was not entertainment. This was real, genuine animosity being aired on live television. When this was Steiner using his platform to say exactly what he felt. He brutally attacked Lex's massive ego. He attacked Lex's ridiculous salary that he did not deserve. He attacked Lex's perceived lack of commitment to the technical craft of wrestling. This was a particular point of contention for Steiner, who had earned his stripes through years of legitimate amateur wrestling competition. Steiner genuinely believed that Lex and other overpaid top stars in WCW were selfishly protecting their own financial interests, while the entire company burned to the ground around them. He believed they cared far more about their own paychecks than the overall health of the company. And he said all of this out loud on live television for everyone to hear. WCW management had completely lost control of its talent by this point. Real, genuine animosity between wrestlers was bleeding directly into the televised product. Steiner's brutal shoot promo attacking Lex was a symptom of a company that was dying and had lost all discipline, but it was also a direct reflection of just how much Lex was hated by his peers. Steiner spoke for a lot of people sitting in that locker room. They saw Lex as selfish and entitled. They saw him as a guy who took everything and gave nothing back. And Scott Steiner made absolutely sure that everyone watching knew exactly how he felt. Number 1, Bruiser Brody, the most legendary necessary piece of real heat in Lex Luger's career happened in January 1987. Lex had been in wrestling for less than a year. He was green, he was inexperienced, he was terrified, and he was booked in a steel cage match against Bruiser Brody. Brody was a 15-year veteran. When he was a global legend, he was an outlaw. He did not follow the rules, he did not take orders, and he did not tolerate disrespect. Before the match, Lex made a huge mistake. He tried to call the match to Brody. He tried to dictate the sequences. In the 1980s locker room, that was a massive breach of etiquette. You did not tell a veteran what to do. Brody was furious. He told people he was not putting up with Lex's bullshit. When the match started, everything seemed normal at first. Then Brody stopped working. He stood motionless in the ring. He refused to sell for Lex. He refused to react to Lex's strikes. Lex was lost. He did not know what to do. He was visibly confused. He was legitimately scared. Brody was sabotaging the match in front of a live crowd. Lex tried to keep going, but Brody would not cooperate. The match became unwatchable. Lex realized it was dangerous. He realized Brody could hurt him if he wanted to. So Lex did the only thing he could think of. He climbed the cage, he scaled the walls, and he fled the ring. The referee, Bill Alfonso, disqualified Lex to end the embarrassment. Brody walked out of the ring dismissive. He said the match just was not working, but everyone knew what had happened. Brody had taught Lex a lesson. You do not disrespect the veterans. You do not skip the line. You do not act like you belong when you have not earned it. The incident branded Lex as someone who could be intimidated. It intensified the scrutiny he faced from the locker room, and it set the tone for the rest of his career. Lex Luger was an outsider, and he would always be an outsider. The pattern is absolutely clear when you step back and look at the full picture. From Bruiser Brody way back in 1987 to Scott Steiner in the late 1990s, Lex Luger was hated by nearly everyone he worked with. He was hated for skipping the line and not paying his dues. He was hated for his enormous ego and sense of entitlement. He was hated for his complete lack of loyalty to any company or person. He was hated for his destructive lifestyle and the people he hurt along the way. And he was hated for the way he treated the people around him like they did not matter. The heat followed him like a dark shadow everywhere he went throughout his entire career. It defined who he was as a performer. It isolated him from his peers, and it ultimately led directly to the darkest, most tragic moment of his entire life. But the story does not end there in darkness. In 2007, Lex Luger suffered a catastrophic spinal stroke that changed everything. He woke up one morning and could not move any part of his body. He was completely paralyzed from the neck down. He had to relearn how to live. And during that incredibly difficult time, something fundamental changed deep inside him. Lex underwent a profound spiritual conversion. He found religion and faith. He found humility for the first time in his life. He started to genuinely reflect on his life and his choices. He started to take real responsibility for his many mistakes. The paralysis, Lex said, was actually a gift from God. It gave him the clarity he had never had before. It gave him the perspective he desperately needed. It allowed him to finally see how much damage he had caused to so many people. Eric Watts visited him in the hospital despite years of hatred. He eventually regained the ability to walk. He regained some of his former strength, but he never regained his place in the wrestling business. That part of his life was over forever. The total package paradox is this brutal truth. Lex Luger was the most physically impressive and imposing man in almost any room he walked into throughout his career, but he was also the most socially isolated and hated man in that same room. He had the perfect look of a superhero and a champion, but he lived the selfish life of a villain and an outcast. He was pushed to the very top of the card over and over again by promoters who saw money in his appearance, but he never truly earned the genuine respect of his peers who saw through the facade. The heat he experienced throughout his career was not random bad luck or coincidence. It was not unfair persecution. It was the direct result of choices he consciously made and a system of respect he deliberately refused to acknowledge. From Bruiser Brody to Scott Steiner, from the Clique to Bill Watts, from Sting to Randy Savage, the pattern was always exactly the same. Lex took shortcuts whenever possible. He put himself first in every situation. He left companies when it suited his interests. And the boys in the back never forgot any of it. The death of Miss Elizabeth is the darkest, most permanent stain on his legacy. It is the moment that proved how destructive his lifestyle had become and how many people he hurt. But his paralysis and his spiritual conversion show that people can change if they truly want to. Time eventually reveals all consequences. Some people can move from hate to empathy and forgiveness. Some wounds can heal with time. Some never do. Lex Luger's story is a cautionary tale that should be studied. It is a harsh lesson about the real cost of unchecked ego. It is a lesson about the absolute importance of respect in a business built on brotherhood. It is a lesson about the lasting damage that comes from living only for yourself. The wrestling business is fundamentally built on trust between performers. It is built on loyalty to each other. It is built on paying your dues and earning your spot. Lex Luger tried to bypass all of that through his looks alone, and he paid a terrible price for that arrogance. The locker room turned on him everywhere he went. The fans eventually turned on him. His own body turned on him. In the end, he was left with nothing but deep regret and a desperate need for redemption and forgiveness. Whether he truly found that redemption is up to each person to decide for themselves. But one thing is absolutely certain and cannot be denied. Lex Luger will always be remembered as the man who had absolutely everything handed to him and lost it all through his own choices. The man who looked like a superhero but lived like an outcast. The man who was genuinely hated by almost everyone he worked with. And the man who, in the end, had to face the devastating consequences of a lifetime of selfish choices. That is the legacy of the total package. And that is exactly why so many people said with conviction, "I hate him."